All right, it is 10:01 on November 19th, and I will call this Early Learning Council meeting to order. Gabby, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair Farrar Campbell. So Chair, you are here. Katie Brooks is excused. Peter Buckley is also excused. Robin Hill Dunbar,
Here.
Eric Hunter,
Present.
Dr. Peg Miller,
Here.
Subin O, he might just be running late. Ruby Ramirez
Here.
and Marie Simons. Marie, I know you're on the call and you might be driving.
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have a quorum, Chair, and happy to get us started. So welcome, Council. First, want to kick things off with we had one submission or request to give verbal testimony at today's meeting. So I am going to go ahead and pass it to Ivy Major McDowell. As you all know, I did send out a written copy of this verbal testimony to you all, I believe yesterday. For folks on the call, this is not included on the packet yet, but will be as soon as we wrap up this meeting, so that a copy of that written testimony will be available to review as well. And with that, Ivy, go ahead whenever you're ready. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, Early Learning Council. For the record, my name is Ivy Major McDowell. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Care Advocacy Manager for Family Forward. But I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Child Care for Oregon Coalition. We are a coalition of nonprofit organizations, labor unions, community advocates, parents, caregivers, and providers, and we are working to build a comprehensive early learning and childcare system. We're here because, well, I'm here to raise our concerns over the -0010 rule change, which would make changes to the employment-related daycare ERDC waitlist bypasses. Our entire economy is dependent on equitable access to childcare. Like roads and bridges, affordable, high-quality childcare is necessary infrastructure that our community, from parents, employers, and children, all need. The proposed rule change would grant DELC authority to suspend critical waitlist exemptions that our coalition advocated for alongside parents, childcare providers, and child welfare professionals. We specifically identified these populations as vulnerable and in need of immediate childcare support. So these are families on TANF, domestic violence survivors, and children referred to the child welfare system. Our coalition worked to prioritize these families because childcare is often what keeps families stable and together. For children going through the child welfare system, having a safe and familiar place to go can mitigate additional harm and keep them close to family. For survivors of domestic violence, stable childcare enables them to work, heal, and rebuild their lives. And for families transitioning off TANF or on TANF, immediate access to childcare is the bridge to employment and self-sufficiency. We understand DELC faces severe budget constraints. The legislature expanded ERDC eligibility but did not adequately fund the program. And now the program is estimated to have a budget deficit of over 100 million. Without additional funding, ERDC will run out of money by January 2027. Though granting DELC authority to suspend ERD bypasses individually will just shift the responsibility of the funding crisis from the legislature onto families, moving vulnerable families from receiving services to waiting for services, and placing a heavier burden on these families who need childcare most. So we urge the Early Learning Council to delay this adoption or consider it, and also raise serious policy and procedural concerns that must be addressed before moving forward. Specifically, this rule change lacks clear safeguards that families need before a bypass is turned off. So it should include explicit requirements for a notice period, outreach and communications to families, and public reporting on how suspending a bypass would affect families and their projected wait list time. The rule change could also maybe not be in compliance with federal law, since federal law mandates that states support families transitioning from TANF to employment, and childcare is a critical component of that. So we need to make sure and be clear of legal confirming that suspending a TANF exemption would not violate federal requirements and risk penalties or loss of TANF funding. Lastly, the rule change puts also the process out of order. The legislature should be the first to provide clear statutory direction about whether and under what circumstances exemptions may be suspended, rather than delegating this authority through an administrative rule. But once again, Childcare for Oregon Coalition is raising alarm over the ERDC budget, and we're calling on the council to advocate for the real funding solution for employment-related daycare. Oregon doesn't have to accept this crisis, and leading up to this 2026 legislative session, we urge the council to call on the governor and legislature to disconnect from the federal tax giveaways, which we can then choose childcare and protect Oregon's children and families over this corporate loopholes, and also close the DELC and ERDC funding gap. We are asking for the legislature to use, if the rainy day fund is triggered, to end this ERDC shortfall and therefore help to invest and support the program before the end of the biennium. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ivy. Let's transition into the administrative rulemaking. Again, Council, we are not taking a vote today on this rule set. This is just to receive a briefing from staff. The vote is scheduled for our December 10th meeting. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Jen and have her, unless Gabby, you had anything in between that you wanted to add.
I also just wanted to let council know that I know Liz mentioned that this is a briefing and there is no vote. The public comment period for this rule set is still open through, I believe, next Friday as well. So just kind of want to preface that as well. And we're still working on finalizing the rule language. We do still have to get it through to DOJ. So just kind of putting that forward as well for folks, and happy to answer any questions towards the end if council has any questions regarding just the administrative process. As we move along. Bear with me one second. Okay, and Jen, I will pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Eras. I'm lead policy analyst for the Child Care Assistance Program team. And I'll be sharing with you some of our updates today. So in this rule bundle, we have 5 different rules that we're making changes to. You can see them listed out here, and then we'll go into each of the specific rules on what we're changing. You'll see some of these are tied together. So for example, this first one on the list, the verification requirements, we found verification requirements in other rules, and so we're pulling them out of those rules and moving it into that one. So you'll see kind of the connection between some of these rule changes and how they're tied together. Next slide. So looks like we're starting with financial eligibility. So with financial eligibility, this rule change is actually just related to some of the language that was currently in the rule regarding flex spending accounts, and it's a type of benefit that employees receive that they can't necessarily take as cash. There were some examples in the rule, but there are a lot of other types of like medical savings accounts and things along those lines. And so we really just added in additional examples to help out with not only clarity for staff who may be reviewing the rules, or individuals who may be interested to see how things are counted, but also to bring clarity in how the one system is currently counting these different employee benefits. So we added in medical savings accounts, health reimbursement arrangements, and also health savings accounts to some examples that were already. So that was the change to that rule. The next rule is the 0075. So this one is provider requirements, but it also includes the provider payment rates. So one of the changes that we made was to language around the special needs rate verification requirements. And this is one that I prefaced earlier, where we took some of this language and moved it into that verification requirements rule. So we had specific requirements on how to verify special needs rate that was living in this rule, because that was tied to rates, but it really made more sense to live in the verification requirements rule. There was also some language that was pointed out to us by our Inclusive Partners program, where it used the language, the norm, and they suggested changing that language to typically expected. So we made those updates. And then we are also updating rules effective January 1st with rate increases for our certified center, certified or registered, um, not just certified center, I'm sorry, all center rates. So certified and exempt centers, as well as certified family and registered family rates. We're still working with the SEIU provider union to determine license exempt rates. And I've got a little more information about the rates and where they landed on the next slide. So the rates were essentially based off of, we had union negotiations with the ASME provider union, where we came to an agreement, and we have a collective bargaining agreement where there are actually two sets of rate increases that were agreed to within this bargaining. So this January 1st, 2026 rule change is the first step in what you'll see. And just to note, the center rates are in alignment with the rates that were negotiated with ASME, even though they aren't represented. We felt like that was not necessarily that we felt like it was important, but it is important so that families can maintain equal access to all types of care in their area. So if we pay one type of provider a particularly higher or lower rate, then that could mean that those families might have more access to, like, say, center-based care over home-based care. And based on our federal regulations, we really need to maintain that standard of equal access to all types of care that they have available in their area. So these rates, like I said, what we have finalized for right now is that we have the licensed family and the center rates. The monthly rates, if you look at rate area A, those are increasing by an average of about 6%, where rate areas B and C are both set at rate area B. So rate area C really doesn't exist anymore, or we don't pay at those levels anymore. But those are increasing by an average of 12% for the monthly rates. And when you look at the hourly rate increases, again, rate area A was a 6% increase, where B and C was a 9% increase. Rate area A was set to the 65th percentile of the market rate study for rate area A. So if you look at the Oregon Child Care Market Rate Study, it's essentially a study of the prices that, or the rates that providers are charging families across the state. Those rates are broken down by region, where they see regions or areas kind of clumped together with higher rates. And traditionally or historically, there have been rate areas A, B, and C. Like I said, we pull those rate area C up to rate area B, and that has been that way for quite some time now. But the percentiles represent the number of slots that a family would have access to in their area based on those rates. So at the 65th percentile, our rates should be able to cover 65 out of every 100 slots that are available in that area with that rate. So rate area A was increased to the 65th percentile. Rate areas B and C went to the 80th percentile of the rate area B market rate study. This is kind of a long-term movement in an attempt to get the state to one rate. So this is the next step that we're taking. Like I said, the first step was really pulling rate area C up. We did price out what it would cost to pull everyone to the 60th, I believe the 60th percentile of rate area A, and that was a little over $80 million for the rest of the biennium. And so we did not have the funding to be able to do that this time. But a second step that was built into this bargaining was that in January 2027, rate areas B and C will get an additional rate increase, moving them to the rate area A scale. So they'll be moved to the 35th percentile of rate area A. And so again, that's one more step. We're not quite there, but that's where we're heading with those rate increases. And then in January 2027, rate area A is just going to remain at the 65th percentile, so they won't see any changes at that point. Slide. So we've got the 0076, the high needs childcare payments. With this rule, we moved some existing language from a different OAR and added it in. There were also some requirements where we put in a time frame for when a plan needed to be dated. So when we're updating information in the system, we do need to see the plan for the children, and it needs to be something that's more recent. That's the verification that's required for like special needs rate and high needs rate. But we do have some flexibilities built into this rule language in case the plan updates have been delayed, because we have seen this in the past where maybe a school district hasn't updated a plan for a child and they're just behind in processing. They may even be out of compliance. And so we have those flexibilities built in that if that's the case, we don't want to harm the child or the family. And then also, there was a note, I think I already mentioned this, that those needed to be updated or noted, kind of touched on with eligibility each year. And then the next rule, the 0024, this is our verification requirements rule that I mentioned earlier. So this is where we pulled in that language that we took out of the provider requirements and rates rule for special needs rate and special needs age. We put all of that into this rule, and then there were some areas within the rule where we needed to clarify how special needs age could be verified. So special needs age is essentially when you have a child that's age 13 or older at their certification period and they still need childcare. With this situation, we really depend on the parent who comes in saying, I need childcare for my child because, and then they essentially will outline why they need childcare for their older child. We've heard all sorts of various reasons, like a home invasion, like their home had been broken into recently and they were nervous about their child safety. One of the more common ones are families who work graveyard shift or single parents who work a graveyard shift with like a 14-year-old or 15-year-old, and they're not comfortable with them staying home alone. And there are also just situations where maybe they have behavioral needs. A child's acting out. I think other situations we had were that they just lived in a dangerous neighborhood and the parents were really nervous about their children walking home after school and not having an adult there to be with them. So this is really something that we leave it up to the families to determine if their child needs childcare. So that's why we had to include this language where the families can self-attest. So that's their verification, as the family states it in this pool of other unique circumstances. So those are just some of the examples that we've heard come through our channels over the years, but there really is a lot of flexibility for the family to be able to determine what's needed for their child. So we just cleaned up some of the rule language there to make that very clear that was regarding the special needs age. And that was all that we changed in this rule this time. Move on to the next one, and I believe
I'm here.
over to Dorothy.
Yeah. Hi, Council. Dorothy Spence. I'm the Early Learning Programs Director for DELC and oversee all of the programs that we deliver to children and families through our grant aid, as well as our Child Care Assistance Program, ERDC. So I am, we understand that this particular rule in the rule adoption is one that is had a lot of feedback from the Rules Advisory Council. It's what you heard Ivy speak to. And so I really wanted to provide the context for why DELC is proposing this rule, what it would mean, and when we would put it into action if we had to. I'm going to repeat some of the same things that you heard from Ivy, but just providing the kind of the full context of the reason behind the proposed rule. So as some of you may be aware, ERDC experienced growth in response to significant policy changes that have made the program work better for families and providers. These things have included shifts in copay, more provider-friendly payment practices, and expanded eligibility and access to new populations. At the same time, over the last several years, we've also had to implement new federal regulations, including requiring 12-month eligibility for families accessing ERDC. As of July 1st, 2023, Oregon implemented 12-month protected eligibility, meaning that there are fewer reasons that cases will close. The result of this is that the caseload significantly increased when the program moved to DELC in July 2023, and all of these various changes were really coming to fruition together. The cost per case increased and attrition decreased. What that meant is that while ERDC was more stable, we met federal regulations and worked better for providers and families, The result was the current structural budget deficit that we're now faced with for ERDC. We did use our first tool in our tool belt to manage that by instituting a wait list for the program to help slow growth. That has been the traditional mechanism to manage a budget for ERDC. And that wait list allowed for certain populations to bypass the wait list. That effort, which is our primary tool, it's always been used in the past, did stabilize and generally flatline the growth of the program, but the caseload has remained at record levels without sustained funding. And our options to address that structural deficit are limited and they come with significant drawbacks. The option that is related to this rule proposal, which is within our legislatively approved budget, that's most feasible and effective, is shutting off the bypasses for a period of time, which could include the TANF bypass. I want to be really clear that this is not something that we want to do necessarily. We understand that these are priority populations that bypass the waitlist that benefit from ERDC to support families' ability to engage in employment or school, provide a stable child development program for young children. However, ERDC has a structural budget issue that must be addressed, or all families who are currently receiving ERDC will be impacted. In order for DELC to utilize the option of closing the bypasses, two things need to happen. One is our rule language proposed today would need to be adopted to allow us to close bypasses. And the second is a statutory change that would be specific to the TANF population, which is our only bypass population that we're statutorily required to prioritize. While the rule language, if adopted, would allow DELC the ability to close bypass populations, I want to also be clear that any action taken by DELC would be done with transparent communication and collaboration with partners. Similar to when we had to roll out the ERDC waitlist, it'd be essential for us to partner with both community partners as well as our agency partners that we're going to rely on if we have to implement this option. Lastly, I just want to really underscore something that Ivy said, and it's just important to note that without the two actions I've mentioned in order to close the bypass, so adopting this rule language and statutory change to close the TANF bypass or TANF population, without those or additional funding, ERDC will run out of funding to pay for any of the approved families receiving a child care voucher as of January 2027. I hope that this provides a bit more context for everyone in the reason why we're proposing this and the ability that it would give the agency to manage the structural deficit, understanding that this is not something DELC would want to do. And if we were to utilize this option and the rule to be adopted, we would be doing that in partnership with community. I also recognize that there are some feedback, if you want to go to the next slide, that we received as part of the RAC. And one of the main concerns was around the notification to families, should this be put into action? And really want to underscore that we would utilize a very similar rollout as we did with the ERDC waitlist in having that transparent communication. And we are updating the rule language to reflect that we would have that notification period built into our process and built into the rules. I think anything else, Jen, that you would want to add on the RAC feedback that I didn't already cover?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think you touched on it. These are vulnerable populations and definitely not actions that we want to take. However, based on the current status of our budget, we are limited in our choices.
Thanks, Jen and Dorothy. Council, I'm sure folks have questions. I think we just have one more or two more slides to go through, and then we'll open it up for questions from you all.
Right. So this is just sharing some information about who was able to participate in the RAC for this rule set. And then here are the timelines that we're at. So we've got the rules presentation for the vote to the council that will be coming up on December 10th. And Gabby had already touched on them. We have our public comment period still happening through the 28th of this month. And then if passed, the effective date for this rule set will be January 1st. I believe that was the last slide.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And then council, I know your packet included a couple public comments that we had received up through, I believe, the 12th. So you'll get an updated form with if there were any additional public comments submitted between the 12th and through the end of the public comment period. You'll receive that December 3rd. And that's also when the packet ahead of the December 10th vote will be posted. So that will be available. And then also just flagging that at the public hearing, I do not believe we had any verbal testimony given, but Kathy, I just want to confirm to make sure that that is accurate.
Yes. Hi, everyone. That's correct, Gabby. We held our public hearing on November 12th and didn't have anyone offer verbal testimony.
Thank you. So with that, Liz, I will pass it back to you.
Okay, council members, do you have questions or comments, feedback? Nope, hold on one second. Robin.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to appreciate Ivy and the families that she's representing at Family Forward, and the testimony. It was really laid out well as the letters that we've received so far. I think I have also so a couple things, a couple comments, and then a couple of questions. The statement that was made about the goal of DELC to move the rate A and B closer was the first time I actually heard that stated, that actually was the goal. And so I was just super excited. I know everyone knows I've been advocating for the rural disparity, and I felt like, oh, we have a shared goal in mind, and there were steps being taken that we could see that. So I really want to applaud that and appreciate it. And I probably with each slide could have a dozen questions. So I'm going to try to be more brief than I'm sounding right now, because it's complicated things and it's important to so many people. And when I think of a family who's impacted or a provider's stability of their program impacted, I just want to understand it so carefully. And all of you at DELC understand it better than I do. I thought that the comments about the statutes being the statutes, the legislative session, and rules that we're approving now, just trying to be in sync with that. And so wondering if there were more considerations about the timing. And then I also saw a lot of updated thinking around the TANF in particular, and I totally hear the consideration for how vulnerable that population already is and why the considerations are so important. But my curiosity question is, will turning off that bypass in particular be enough to stave off millions of dollars that are needed? And if so, is it worth a month of, I don't know. I just didn't have the math to be able to understand what turning it off and on could actually mean for the longevity of more families being served. So I'll pause there. There's other questions, but maybe others won't have time too. So
Yeah. So on the statutory and rule overlap question, so the timing that we've done on when we would need those authorities. So let me be clear. In statute, the bypass populations other than TANF don't exist. So the bypass populations outside of TANF, so we're talking about Baby Promise, Head Start contracted slots, child welfare, those are all in rule. So we already have we already have the statutory authority. We just need the rule authority for those populations. The TANF population and TANF, the temporary assistance for domestic violence survivor grant population, those two populations, which we kind of wrap into TANF, those are what we are statutorily required to prioritize and need a statutory change in combination with the rule authority in order to close that bypass. So just those are two pieces together. The statutory authority and the rule pieces would need to be in place by July of next year in order for us to implement, if we had to implement that strategy, in order for us to close bypasses and save or meet the reduction level that we need. So that reduction level, our deficit right now is between 93 million and 111 million. We would have to close our bypass populations for 10 months starting July 2026. Any later than July 2026, and we will run out of money. That bypass closure is no longer would not be an option in terms of meeting our deficit level. To your second question around TANF, that is our primary population that's driving kind of the majority of the bypass population. It's our other bypasses are pretty small populations. The child welfare one, baby promise is very small. Head Start contracted slots is a very small. That's the primary population that bypasses right now. And so that by closing the bypass, that's where we are having those savings. And then the projections that we have put into place, we could close all of the other bypasses for 10 months and wouldn't touch our structural deficit. The TANF piece of that is what is critical. By closing that for 10 months, that would meet the structural deficit.
Thank you, Dorothy. And can I ask a follow-up question then on one thing that you were talking about? When we talk about the TANF population in particular, I know that ERDC is a different funding stream, but TANF has funding related to supports for family. Is there any reality in the future where DHS would work with DELC around a funding stream that's specific to TANF that would allow them to retain this important support outside of the ERDC funding stream? Sorry for that, Subin. I know you have your hand.
I might ask Carrie, do you mind taking that question?
From a federal rule perspective, there is permission from the feds for something called a TANF transfer to allow for TANF fundings to support childcare when it is at a different state agency. Right now, DHS, I believe, is working with the governor's office and exploring what is or isn't possible, or are there other requirements that they have to meet due to state law around what they are offering TANF families who have job search or employment requirements in their plan.
Subin.
Hi, so this might be a question for Carrie. So I'm hearing or understanding, I still feel like I'm trying to wrap my brain around everything, that we're trying to make rule changes that may bring cost savings in a time where things are challenging. What else in DELC are we talking about that might, what else are we thinking we might cut, right? Or where are the other cost savings happening in DELC? I don't know if that's an easy question to answer.
I mean, I think, we're trying to be very careful on the operations side of things and reduce as much as possible of the spending that DELC has to protect as much funding as possible for the biennium. But I think if some of you listened to our presentation yesterday, 91% of our funding goes to grant and aid. So for any true cost savings at the magnitude that we're talking about for ERDC, our only mechanism right now is reduction in services. So there isn't any, magical slush fund to shift things around to kind of cover these things. Everything is kind of earmarked. So I think what you saw yesterday is if the legislature asks us to do a reduction at some point in 2026 to handle the kind of fiscal situation the state is facing, you saw that we tried to first do shifts in federal funding, operation cuts, and then we have a prioritized list on the program side, trying to protect the services as much as possible. So I think if all of that remains, and you might have heard me say that reduction exercise intertwines with this ERDC situation, but this ERD situation exists separate of that for the reasons that Dorothy outlined, so they interact, but they're kind of two separate issues. If we didn't have that reduction exercise that was requested of us from the legislature, we would still be in front of you, the legislature, and the governor's office discussing this structural deficit that really ERDC, because of all those policy changes, started at DELC not fully funded for the policy changes that were implemented over the last several biennium.
I was typing and talking. Okay, Robin, follow-up question.
Since no one else is raising their hand, I'm going to take more time. I'm sorry. One of the slides that talked about the income eligibility, about like health savings accounts, etc. Was that actually was it adding different categories to not be counted or to be counted? Because the way I was reading it, it meant that if you're applying for ERDC, if you have a health savings account, it would count against your eligibility because it would be showing as an income, or is that what it's meaning? Because that seems ludicrous that if you have a health savings account, it counts against your eligibility for ERDC when it's not. I mean, ludicrous might not be an official word, but it seemed, I was like, wow, really?
I would have to check to see if this is countable versus non-countable income. I can definitely get you this answer just in a couple of minutes. So this was really just adding additional examples to something that's already in existence as far as what income is counted and not counted. So it's not changing countable income, but if you give me just a second, I can confirm and get back to you.
Thank you.
While Jen's looking for that, why don't we go to Ruby?
Thank you. So appreciate all the comments. Actually, we often don't get that many. And I'm looking at Dorothy's presentation about the rule update based on feedback, but I still feel like there is the concern is the level of transparency about how the decisions are made and when. And so I wonder if there is some more language or something else that provides advocates, communities, families, some kind of guarantee that it's a conversation, like a transparent conversation about not just this is coming, but how the decision was made. And I mean, I think the advocates know the situation, right? Clearly, Ivy is not arguing that there's money that we can pull out of the sky. But I'm still concerned that it's the proposed update, and maybe I haven't read the entire rule set. But I'm still concerned it's not enough to make folks comfortable about how the decisions are being made. And I know they're hard decisions, and you all probably haven't even articulated how that actual decision is going to be made in 2026 or 27 or whatever the case may be. You know, I know that work has been done to sort of obviously figure out the budget situation and when you run out of money, but there still feels like there's some other layer necessary to make folks in the public feel comfortable with how the decisions are made. So I don't know what that looks like, or if there's already been a conversation and this was the outcome, but I worry that, you know, we're going to be asked to approve this rule set with more public comment that looks like this that we don't get to address.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, Ruby, and I don't know, Carrie, if you want to talk at all about kind of the conversations you've been having with advocates around this. You and I know Kate Dennison has also been having conversations. I think we've tried to be really honest with advocates about the financial situation we're in and the options that we have that are limited. I don't know if rule language is going to give the assurances to advocates that they need, and it's a matter of a relationship and a commitment around how that rollout would happen if it has to happen. What's the date at which we need to really decide, are we going to have to pull this trigger or not? And then if we do, how do we do that in a way that communicates clearly with the most impacted folks, providers, families? I do think that we have a somewhat of a blueprint because of the ERDC wait list implementation, that we got really positive feedback when we had to implement the wait list, which was not, we didn't want to have to do that either, right? That wasn't something that anyone looked forward to, but we did have really positive feedback on how that process went that we can look to. But I might look to Carrie to just talk a little bit about kind of what those communications have been like up to this point and kind of what we really can commit to with advocates as we move forward in navigating this.
Yeah, I think we've been, since my time of being interim, have been trying to have frequent conversations with the advocates around this. But Dorothy, I'm thinking that maybe part of the December meeting is we could take that process we did for the wait list and map it out for this one. So it could be in draft form, and it could be if the following circumstances happen, what would be the due dates? I think we would need to do that work for ourselves with the legislature and governor's office as well, so that everyone's clear on, with the July date that Dorothy gave all of us, that it's clear then, therefore, when would all of this clear communication and process need to happen by.
Additional questions from the council?
I can answer the question from earlier and give people some time to think about more questions for us.
Yeah, go ahead.
But yes, so the change is really when an individual has income that they are diverting into a flexible spending or medical savings account from their initial pay. So it doesn't have to do with benefits that the individual doesn't have the option of taking as cash. For the ERDC program, it's always counted gross income. There are other programs that do allow deductions to gross income before comparing the family's income to the income limit. But historically, the ERDC program has always looked at gross income. So this is just in those cases where it would be the individual's gross income, but they're choosing to elect to have it diverted into a separate pre-tax account or something along those lines. So I hope that helps to clarify.
Thank you so much for helping me understand that.
Additional questions, council? Subin.
This is more a comment for fellow council members. Something that's just not sitting well with me is that we've spent the last 2 or 3 meetings really thinking and talking about what can we do around childcare, and now we're about to vote on something that can have an effect on negatively impacting childcare. And so I'm just naming that as I totally get everything, the challenges. I don't want to be naive and think about money's going to come from the sky or something like that. But I want to feel when it comes time to vote that we turned over every stone, that we really thought about what is every single option that we could do before we start, affecting service levels in childcare.
Additional comments or questions, council? Robin.
Chatty Kathy today, sorry. I agree with Subin, and I just want to add to that I sometimes feel like there's a black box of how to fix some of the childcare complexity. And when I was hearing the presentation about the amount of money that it's going to take to do XYZ, I was like, oh, that's actually what we've needed. Is we need $80 million, we need $1 billion, whatever it is, to be able to advocate for childcare, a tangible mathematical equation that says this is one thing that will help. And then we've had many conversations about how to engage the business sector that isn't already engaged. I think when we have those X plus Y equals Z, this is the amount of money we need and why and when, I think that helps strengthen the unified voice of strengthening childcare for everyone.
Thanks. Marie, did you come off mute? Did you have something?
It looked like she was connecting to audio. Marie, if you were trying to say something, we can't hear you.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would echo what all of my fellow council members have said. I think Subin said it's just not sitting with him. This one's just not quite sitting with me either. I think we've heard a lot of reasons why. it almost has the feel like we as council are being asked to prioritize populations on the wait list by not granting those exemptions to bypass. And I'm curious about, is that our responsibility as council to make that determination? It feels like that lies with the legislative authority. And again, I'm going to echo what Robin just said, which is it would be really helpful to see some fiscal analysis on this, to have some numbers to be able to put to what y'all are saying in terms of when we're going to run out. Maybe some additional information about what populations are going to be most impacted by this. I just feel like there's a lot of questions still hanging out there before we're able to make a solid next step on this.
Thanks, Marie. Additional questions or comments? I have a question actually about timing, because I think, clearly we have a cliff that we are driving toward as we're speaking right now, right? And obviously I'm concerned about there being, thousands of families that suddenly lose their ERDC come January 2027. But it seems to me a lot of what's driving that is the TANF bypass. And you all have already said that that requires statutory authority. So I guess my question on timing is why is the council being asked to take up this rule set before the legislature has weighed in on whether they're willing to grant you that authority? Because it seems to me like unless they do that in the short session, we still are going to have this cliff, right? And what I'm sensing from some of the council members is there's a feeling that this may be above our pay grade on the TANF thing, and until we actually understand where the legislative body is, we're actually not solving the fiscal problem, right? Until we understand whether they have the political will to turn off the TANF bypass. So I wonder if you could speak to, why aren't we taking this up, say, immediately after the short session ends, instead of, here in November? So could you guys just share your thinking about why we're going first as opposed to the legislature?
Yeah, I think that that's a valid question. And I think that given some of the comments and the desire to more deeply understand the numbers behind the reasoning, we have flexibility that we can wait. I do, I just want to be realistic that if, though this may still need to happen, once the legislative session, we get through the legislative session. But I think that that's a very valid comment and desire to kind of push this particular part of the rules, this rule proposal, to after the legislative session. It can also give us, again, that opportunity to have more conversation with you all around the ERDC budget as a whole, and help build some understanding of the budget numbers behind all of this as well.
I agree, Dorothy. It would give us both time for that budget conversation as well as just mapping out the calendar. So the other concern about communication with the community, when and how we could prepare those things for early in the new year all together as one piece.
I also wanted to say one other thing about the rates, and I think Robin said this really well, which is a deep appreciation and honestly like an internal excitement that we're all swimming in the direction of one rate across the state for and not varied by zip codes. And I just wonder if there was some rationale you may share in terms of numbers on doing the percentages got me a little bit confused. And so on the side, I was kind of Googling, what is the actual A rate? What is the actual B rate? And knowing that the A rate is so much higher, obviously 6% being a lower percentage, but it's more because it's higher, 12% of a lower number is a lower amount. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit about actually how much closer we're getting versus the percentage of how much you're increasing each by. That was I couldn't quite follow the numbers, all the numbers. So like, are we decreasing the gap this year by 10%? Are we decreasing the gap this year by, so just a little bit, so to better understand, like, this step is step one in decreasing the gap by a certain percentage, and by next year we expect to decrease the gap again by whatever it is.
That's a great question. And looking at the January 1st, 2026 increases, it's I did plot this out, and I can find this and share this in the chat as well. But it's essentially decreasing the gap, but it's pretty minimal. It's keeping rate areas B and C from falling any more behind, and trying to take a little bit step closer. That second increase in January 2027 is the one that's really going to narrow the gap quite a bit. So I think the visual is going to say a lot more than what I can try and explain with numbers. So I'll grab that and I can pop that in the chat.
You may all know that we have a process going on where Oregon State University has a federal grant looking at, can we learn from programs about what is the cost of care, in addition to the market price study that tells us what people are charging for care. We just got verification today that the feds have approved the contractor that they want to use on the cost modeling. So that work is moving forward, as well as for kind of this continued conversation around kind of rates. What does it cost to give care?
Well, Jen's finding that. Any other questions or comments that counselors have? I think we'll just pause here.
Yeah, and Liz, I just again want to make another plug that the public comment period is still open through the 28th, and we have a form on our website on the rulemaking section that takes you directly to where you could submit written comment. And also just also going to share that the slide deck that you saw today had one additional slide that was not previously shared. That will also be updated and posted on the website. So it's the most up-to-date packet with that additional slide and a copy of Ivy's written public comment as well. It should be available by like 11:30 on our website.
Great.
And if there's no other questions or comments, Jen, I was just going to say, if you don't have that response, I'm happy to follow up with council in an email, but I just saw that you came off mute.
Yeah, I do have it. I'm not able to plug it into the chat for some reason. So Gabby, if I could just send that to you really quick, maybe you can get that in there, but it's not letting me put the chart in there.
Liz, I haven't received the comment yet, but council, I'll follow up with that information just so that you all have it handy. And then Kelsey, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but council, I do just want to take, since we have some time, give a quick sec for Kelsey Culbertson to introduce herself. She's new here at Delk, and I believe someone that we will be seeing quite often given her new role. So Kelsey, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and your role, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Kelsey Culbertson. started with Delk in September in the new role as the Early Learning and Childcare Administration Manager. So I am working on Dorothy's team, overseeing Preschool Promise, Baby Promise, and the ERDC program.
Welcome.
I'm excited to be here, excited to work with you all. I've had some connectivity issues today during this meeting, so like right now everybody is frozen. So I hope you can hear me. But I look forward to continuing my work with you guys as the years go on.
Wonderful. We're excited to work with you. Well, Council, any last questions or comments before we leave? Gabby will follow up with links so folks can see the rates. I also just wanted to echo an appreciation to Delk. These are hard conversations to have. I am really excited about the rural rate moving. That was something I think several of us, when we came on the council 2 years ago, highlighted in one of our very first votes that we wanted to see addressed. And so thank you for taking that on and making progress. And more to come on this rule set during our December 10th meeting. So if there are no other questions or comments, I think I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. It's 10:57. Bye-bye, guys.